One thing I found interesting was how white people would sell their homes directly to black people. I think that just sparked a bit of hope in me that there have always been people who stood up for what they believed in and stood up for the minorities or the scapegoats of the nation, even when it wasn't the norm to do so. That just stuck out to me. That felt important to me to remember. In my city, Kalamazoo, there definitely has been a history of redlining, especially in the 50s and 60s. And you see this in neighborhoods. And like growing up in Kalamazoo, I've, seen all sides, and I've had friends in like all neighborhoods really. And you can definitely see where money goes and where it does not. And the richer, like nicer neighborhoods do tend to be the ones with more white people. I think of like the Winchell neighborhood and the Bronson neighborhood. Like they're not entirely white people, but you can see majority of white people are in those nicer, richer neighborhoods versus South Side, which is seen as like the ghetto. Or at least that's what I've heard my whole life. And really that's just a result of redlining and segregation, that this side of Kalamazoo is poorer and does have a higher population of black people and has a worse rap for crime and drugs and homeless people, when really crime and drugs and homeless people, they are high in Kalamazoo, but that's really all parts of Kalamazoo. I think that if our community were to do like a fair share thing and started to give resources and updating city fixtures like streets, signs, etc., public spaces, then South Side and poorer neighborhoods and more neighborhoods populated by black people could grow into really beautiful neighborhoods, because the houses on the South Side really have beautiful foundations and beautiful homes. Just like the people living there were never given the resources to grow those homes and update those homes. And I do think that there is a fine line between gentrification and updating, but I think that it can be done if we start just like treating those neighborhoods the same as any other neighborhood in Kalamazoo. The city updates and like rejuvenates, I guess. So I think Kalamazoo community is somewhat segregated past the neighborhoods. I just Googled the statistics, and in both Kalamazoo Central and Loy Norrix, which are the two big high schools for Kalamazoo, the rate of race is about 30% white people versus 70% people of color and other minorities, versus Portage schools, which is opposite, about 70 white people to about 30% people of color. And the first time this really stuck out to me is when I saw a musical at Portage schools, and the entire cast was white. There was like, to my recollection, there was not a single person of color in the cast. And that really stood out to me because my school was just so like diverse. And I thought about it, and I had friends who went to Portage schools who never really had friends who were people of color or from different like walks of life. So I think definitely there is segregation, and there are people in the Kalamazoo area who have only been around white people. Even if that is Portage, which isn't technically Kalamazoo, they are just very close neighbors. Yeah, so Chief Justice John Roberts, I think a lot of people like him just didn't know the history. And so I think knowing history of redlining and segregation and the implications it had then and now definitely would have changed his kind of like what he said and his views. And I think that's important for everybody. I think that everybody should take an African American studies class. Everyone should have access to Black history, especially living in America. I also think having a unit for local history, which is, to my knowledge, isn't common or isn't a thing at all, but I think that would help kind of like better people's understanding for why neighborhoods are so segregated and what redlining is, and to kind of see that in play in your own town would change perspectives for a lot of people. What were the other questions? Oh, what is one thing you'd like to better understand about your home or community? Kalamazoo was built on native land, and it was named after the original name given by the natives. I think that I would have loved to learn more about whose land we're living on and where they went, because really Kalamazoo does not have a high rate of Native American people, and I would have just loved to see that more taught to me, I guess. And sure, I could go and research it myself, but I think that's something that is so important. It should be taught in schools. That is just the history of your town, and I think that it would be beneficial if schools did implement something like that, where a unit out of their history course was dedicated to local history.